A challenging climate, strange days, unprecedented times. However we choose to describe it, there is no doubt that the coronavirus has brought upheaval and disruption to global society on a level that many of us have never experienced before. While there's much talk of the pandemic being a great leveller due to its holistic impact on day-to-day life, the truth is far more complex, with individuals, businesses and organisations feeling the effects of the coronavirus in a variety of different ways. The new normal aims to give these people an opportunity to tell their stories, assess the potential impacts of the pandemic on their lives and careers, as well as exploring the challenges and opportunities that have arisen from this era-defining situation. Each week, myself, Chris Webb and Helen Armitage from the Careers and Employability Service at Sheffield Hallam University will be joined by a different guest from the world of industry, educational careers, with opportunities for listeners to put their questions forward in advance of the podcast. Thanks for tuning in and joining us as we explore what the new normal means for all of us on a local, national and global scale. Welcome to this week's episode of The New Normal. As usual, I'm joined by my co-host, Helen Armitage. Helen, how are you doing today?
Very well, thank you. How are you, Chris?
Yeah, not too bad, can't complain. And this week we're joined by the University Success Manager at Handshake, Clare Adams. Clare, thanks very much for coming on the show.
Very welcome, very happy to be here.
Wonderful. So we were actually having a quick chat with Clare last week, and Clare came up with the wonderful catchphrase which we think we might steal for this podcast, which is guaranteeing never more than 50% gloom, as we hope with this podcast to balance things a little bit with the ray of sunshine and, of course, that injection of realism as well. So we decided for this week it would be useful to start with our gloom balancers for the week. So what's kind of helped us be a little bit more positive during the kind of current climate. So Helen, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I think that, well, there were two stories that grabbed me this week and they stuck with me quite a lot. The first one is Jacinda Ardern in New Zealand, who has declared that the tooth fairy and the Easter bunny are essential workers. So she was kind of giving a ray of hope to all the children in New Zealand that they are going to get their Easter eggs and their money for their teeth over the Easter weekend. And then the second one was that the Himalayas are actually visible from 150 miles away for the first time in 30 years as a reduction of pollution around the area. So I thought they were some really interesting and quite nice rays of sunshine stories to start with.
Yeah, absolutely. Clare, what about yourself?
I'm actually going to steal one that my boss spoke to me about this morning, David Scholl. I don't know if you guys have seen it in the news, but Apple and Google have decided to collaborate, which I think is, remarkable given that there's such kind of, competitors in the space. They are going to collaborate on some contact sourcing technology to kind of support how, everyone deals with the coronavirus, which I think is just a wonderful story of people coming together, actually, people that you wouldn't expect to come together to sort of work together to collaborate to beat this thing together, which I think is really lovely.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. And I think from what I understand, the NHS are actually it's going to make their lives easier, isn't it, in terms of the contact tracing app as well?
Yeah,
so.
Exactly.
Brilliant. I should probably come up with one myself. So I think for me, it's probably been this week talking to lots of friends and family and actually finding out a little bit more about what everybody does for a living, which I think, weirdly, we didn't always do, certainly in my kind of family or group of friends. So I think this has actually been quite a positive thing and hopefully sort of continues after the virus. So I've certainly found that that's been a real positive, trying to get to know a little bit more about what everyone's up to and kind of how things have affected them, really. So yeah, that's my gloom balancer for the week anyway. We need to get a little jingle for that.
Just for that bit.
So without further ado, we'll kind of get things kicked off, Clare. So perhaps if you could just start by telling our listeners a little bit more about sort of maybe how the current situation with the coronavirus has affected you personally and the role that you're doing at the moment.
Yes, so my role at the moment, as you've already mentioned, is I'm University Success Manager here at Handshake, working obviously primarily in the UK. My role really is around supporting university partners to get the most out of the platform for their students, their employers that they're working with, their team as a whole, but also any other internal or external stakeholders that they're working with. Obviously, like most people, I am now working entirely remotely, and have been now for around 4 to 5 weeks, I think. And actually that transition has been fairly easy for me, if I'm entirely honest. There's obviously some challenges in that myself and my partner are working in a one-bed flat, and like you say, Chris, learning about each other's jobs for the first time possibly ever. But actually, one of the things I was reflecting on a couple of weeks ago was this transition's been a lot easier because I am at Handshake, and I've recently transitioned to Handshake around 5 months ago. Prior to that, I was managing the careers service at the University of Westminster, and had been there for around 7 years. And before that, had been in various different roles in HE and FE and the private sector. And I think coming into Handshake with a global team, many of which you already work remotely, 24/7, 7 days a week. They don't work 7 days a week. We don't work that hard, but they're already working remotely. So a lot of the technology and working practices I'd already kind of spent a bit of time getting used to, and been on that kind of learning curve. So this adjustment to working remotely has been not quite as jarring, I think, as it could have been if I had gone straight from a HE university environment. And I think it's been phenomenal to see how the university sector has kind of pivoted into that so quickly. But definitely I've found it a sort of easier transition, I think, because of
that's
that
really
change
interesting
to
really interesting to hear that, actually. And I think you wrote an article, as we know, recently, sort of talking about kind of adapting to remote working and particular kind of digital tools. I mean, just before we kind of move on, are there any sort of top tips that you would sort of give to people currently moving to remote working, or any particular digital tools that you found most useful during your current work?
I think for me, with any change, and I talk about this a bit in the article that I put on LinkedIn, but I think with any change, significant change, or any opportunity where you're going to need to develop some new skills, adaptability and how you adapt is what makes it successful. And adaptability is a thing that's made humans the most successful species on earth, but it's very different from one person to another how you want to approach things. And I think my main tip would be spending time understanding what you already know about your working style, what you know about your learning preferences, and then applying that to this new working environment and the new skills that you need to learn. I think when it comes to digital tools, most of them can be useful. They can all be useful in some way, but I think you have to almost approach them like physical tools as well. You wouldn't just pick up a sewing machine and expect to be able to work it straight away, or get on a bike and think that it fits you perfectly. You have to spend time understanding how they work, getting the settings right, so that it's right for you. For example, when I started at Handshake, I was presented with Slack, and I'd never used Slack really before. I was used to very much sort of email communications, perhaps a more formal form of higher education communication. And then I was suddenly presented with all of these emojis and GIFs, and I didn't know what the etiquette was. When should you send the heart emoji? When do you send a GIF? I don't know. I've never had to do that before. So I think that was definitely quite challenging for me when I first got into Slack. And also I found it quite distracting initially, all these notifications and noises that it was making. But once I'd spent some time understanding the purpose of it, how the business was using it, getting the settings right for me and how I wanted to use it, I now love it now. And I think that it's an excellent way to communicate with colleagues, both on little projects that you're working on or socially, and share information. So yeah, instant messaging is one I've gone from kind of hating and not understanding to kind of really getting into and finding a lot of benefits of it, actually.
I think that's a really good point as well about the plethora of tools, because so many articles seem to be out at the moment, purporting which digital tool is better and which is the best. Yeah. And so I think it's a really good point about taking that time to explore them and see which ones work for you. So yeah, exactly. really useful reflection there. We're going to move on now, Claire, if that's okay, just to look at some of the sort of challenges and I suppose some of the potential sort of opportunities that you've seen through some of the conversations that we've had. So I'm going to pass straight over to Helen as we go through some of the questions that we're going to talk about today.
Okay, so first up, you kind of covered this a bit already, but for those that aren't familiar with Handshake, can you provide a bit of a brief overview about what Handshake does and what support it provides to students and organisations?
Yeah, so I think the best way to explain Handshake is if you imagine your traditional kind of careers management or vacancy system that, you know, are being used at various different universities and colleges up and down the country. Imagine that, and then imagine a kind of early careers, early talent kind of network. And Handshake really bridges the gap between the two. So it's kind of your traditional career management system meets LinkedIn, meets Glassdoor, meets Facebook, that kind of thing. So it's very much a network. And it was designed by students for students. So it started out at a university called Michigan Tech in the States around 7 years ago. The founding members were actively involved in the career service, you know, went to go and see their careers advisors, that kind of thing, but could see some issues and barriers that the team were facing when they were trying to interact with employers and students, you know, on both sides. So they kind of set out on a bit of a mission as tech students to solve that, and and then Handshake was born. Really, it's a national network, but it's kind of evolved over the years to become a bit more of a community. And then in addition to that, we've also got, you know, the traditional kind of tools that you would imagine that would be there for careers advisors, that kind of thing. You know, when the founding members kind of started out in 2013, I think they said if they signed 10 universities or 6 universities, I think maybe in the first 3 years, they'd count that as success. 7 years later, they've got over 900 universities in the United States and 5 million students actively using the platform, you know, and over 500,000 employers, so that the growth has been, you know, quite considerable. And we're launching in the UK this summer. So yeah, it's definitely very interesting time for us, given everything that's going on as an organisation, but we're really confident there's lots that we can do to both support the network that's already kind of mature in the US, but also there's some potential in the UK to really reach out and support employers, students and universities as well.
And you obviously mentioned earlier, Claire, that as a kind of digital platform, you know, a lot of the work that's already going on at Handshake is sort of done remotely between partners in the UK and the US. But I mean, how has COVID-19 impacted on Handshake as an organisation, I suppose, so far in your experience?
Yeah, so I mean, firstly, I think ultimately we're an organisation of individuals, so it's all impacted us very differently. We are very lucky in that we can all work remotely. Not everyone, you know, is fortunate enough to be in that position. So our first priority has really been about making sure everyone's okay, everyone feels connected, everyone feels supported, and then we can really do our best work to support our partners, the students, you know, universities and employers as well. It's challenging times for lots of people, and the more we can kind of show up to support, the better. From a business perspective, obviously, you know, our objectives are to support those 3 sides, so that hasn't really changed, but obviously our kind of immediate focus and short-term plans have. Our immediate focus in the US especially, well, in the product, from a product perspective I should say, has been around looking at product roadmaps, and where a lot of our tools already support virtual events to some extent, we've had to sort of fast track some changes in, you know, appointments and event delivery to make sure that advisors and career services are, you know, have the best tools available to deliver their services virtually. Also, because of the data we have moving through the US network, we have spent quite a lot of time, you know, looking into that and what trends can we pick up, and sharing that with the community as well, trying to sort of expand the kind of knowledge that's being shared across the network. From a US sort of community perspective, we've done a lot of work kind of bringing practitioners together to try and share good practice, but also producing a wide range of resources for students, from anything from kind of working and getting hired remotely to also more practical things around, you know, how do you cope when you need to move back to home after college, after university during this time, and how to look after your mental health, things like that. In the UK, we're not live here, so we've taken a slightly different approach in that we've been reaching out to employers, career services, and other people kind of working in the space to kind of find out how we can help, and we've changed our plans very much in the UK to kind of meet those demands, I would say.
Do you think there might be a move potentially from UK universities now towards more of the digital platforms now that the lockdown measures have affected the way that a lot of people are operating? Or?
I think Potentially, yes. I think the universities are definitely rethinking how they deliver some of those physical activities in a virtual space. And I think, the good thing is they're reaching out to vendors and their current partners to kind of say, what can you do to help? And I think, the great thing is that no matter who you are as a vendor, you're kind of there and ready to show up to help. So I think definitely there's a move to sort of lean on those kinds of services, and I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Okay, so on a whole then, we've spoken about what Handshake kind of does. What do you think the impact of COVID-19 has had on students, employers and universities? It's impacting everybody in every single sector, really. But yourself, what do you think that the impact is on those three key areas?
I mean, like you said, I think there's a lot of uncertainty, isn't there, at the moment? And with uncertainty, there's understandably a lot of anxiety as well, as people try to kind of understand what's going on. I think what's really nice is we've seen people coming together, which is, really positive. From the data that we're seeing in the US, from an employer perspective, and this is kind of taken from the end of March, beginning of April, we were seeing, similar to what ISE have been saying, that people are not kind of ready to make concrete decisions yet. There's still quite a lot of uncertainty around what those recruitment goals and timelines are going to look like. However, we are seeing a decrease in the number of vacancies that are being advertised through the platform, but I think it's fair to say that there's quite a difference between different sectors. So, for example, in hospitality, we've seen there's kind of a 60% decrease in the number of opportunities that are moving through the platform in the US, which is kind of the highest decrease. But for not-for-profit, for example, that's only their decrease is at around 13%. It's still a decrease, but it's obviously nowhere near as hospitality. So across the sectors, everyone's experiencing this quite differently. And even within that, within certain job functions within those industries, we're seeing changes as well. Remote working is quite an interesting one, in that we've obviously seen an increase in those opportunities moving through the system, but it's still a very small percentage, around sort of 5% of the total. So there's sort of an indication that people are advertising these roles, but they're going to go, employers may be advertising remote working, but they're very much expecting them to be on site at some point.
Yeah. I mean, you mentioned obviously, sorry, Claire, to interrupt there. I mean, you mentioned obviously about that sort of decrease in possible kind of graduate vacancies or current vacancies for students. And you mentioned obviously the ISE research, which I think sort of indicated, 27% of graduate employers potentially recruiting less graduates. From kind of Handshake's perspective, given that you're in sort of the business of connecting students and graduates to employers, what sort of things or what kind of steps are you taking to sort of mitigate against this?
Yeah, so again, it's difficult because the approach in the UK to the US is slightly different. So I think it's helpful to think about it in sort of three separate pieces. So from a product perspective, what we're doing in the US and what we're doing in the UK. From a product perspective, like I said, we're completely reviewing what the product roadmaps for the future, for the next few months, and thinking about how we can further support partners to deliver a range of activities virtually that will support students depending on their needs, rather than just solely sort of recruitment. So what kind of events can we do to upskill, that kind of thing. From a community perspective in the US, it's very much around running network-wide kind of sessions on Ask Me Anything from careers advisors, to kind of make use of that national network so people aren't having to duplicate various different areas of their offering. From a UK perspective, we're very much focused on, there's a few different things that we're doing. We're going to be working with the amazing Grad Consult actually over the next couple of months, running some fortnightly sessions, bringing sort of practitioners together to kind of discuss some of the key topics that we think that colleagues should be discussing at the moment, ranging from student mental health to how we can connect students and employers virtually. But the most sort of the main thing that we're doing is we're actually bringing our launch forward. So as of mid-May, all students in the UK with an ac.uk email address will have access to the Handshake network. That was always going to be part of our launch anyway, but we're just bringing it forward considerably given everything that's going on. And alongside that, what we'll be doing between May and July is running a range of events with both employers and organisations that all students across the network can access, looking at things like either that it's employers recruiting, or it's employers offering sort of skills sessions, or it's organisations offering practical advice on, you know, how to look after your mental health during this period. And we open, maybe some careers advisors from Sheffield Hallam would want to do a session as well.
You've twisted our arms, go on.
That was so smooth, Claire. Slide it in there.
Slide it in. But I think about bringing the network together earlier and being able to show students that they're not alone. That there are other students going through this, and that there are people willing to help is you know, really important to us. And if we need to bring that launch forward to do that, then that's definitely something that we're going to do. So that's a big change for us.
Yeah.
You obviously mentioned about, you know, that there are these kind of clear differences between the labour markets within the US and the UK. Have you noticed any parallels from a sort of an employer or a student perspective so far? Obviously, with the caveat that you've not launched in the UK yet.
Yeah, that's it. The problem is we don't have any data in, you know, from the UK network. We have so much data in the US, and I think that a lot of the stuff that we're learning from students and employers in the US, you know, I think mirrors some of the stuff that that we would imagine or is being seen in the UK. You know, so for example, in the US, we know that from the network in the US, about 75% of students are still looking for a job. They're just switching their activities and the kind of actions they're taking around that slightly. So between sort of 40 and 50% are, you know, saying that they're going to update their online profile, they're going to start researching employers online, they're going to start online networking, which isn't hugely surprising given everything that's going on. We're also seeing a slight change in the kind of opportunities that students are willing to consider at this time compared to last year. So they're a bit more open to kind of gig or part-time work, that kind of thing, than they were before because of everything that's going on. Interestingly as well, we also talked to them about what kind of services they wanted from their career service. I think for a lot of them, seeing their career service close and it not be kind of on their doorstep in some cases was a bit challenging. So some of the suggestions coming out of that data were that students wanted to, you know, have virtual advice sessions, which obviously, you know, universities are doing, and wanted to see exactly a list of exactly what employers were still recruiting and advice on their online profile, that kind of thing. So I think there are some suggestions there around some of the content that, you know, many university career services are already rolling out now given the change. And I think so there are quite a few comparables from the UK and the US, but obviously we only have it anecdotally in the UK or from other providers. But yeah, I think there's a similar situation to some extent. Very similar.
You've mentioned a bit there that it sounds like students are being quite proactive and adapting to the nature of the kind of economy now and the job market now, which is really positive to see. And I've seen it myself. I've witnessed it in a few students and graduates that I've spoken to, and I think this is great. You know, you're kind of expecting that some students would just be kind of frozen, but others, this vast majority, do seem to be reacting quite well to it. So with that in mind, do you think that employers are going to be looking for certain skills at heightened level? Resilience, flexibility, it's always been in demand for certain employers, well, for all employers really, but do you think because of COVID-19 pandemic, where students are having to be more proactive and change the way that they look for jobs and what they're kind of asking for in the way of experience, do you think employers will be looking for resilience, flexibility, adaptability at a heightened level after this?
I think it's a really good question. I think I don't know if they'd be looking for it at a heightened level, but I think the current climate provides, you know, an excellent opportunity for students and all of us, you know, not just students, to demonstrate, you know, many of those, you know, demonstrate resilience, adaptability, you know, flexibility. But equally, I think, you know, out of adversity breeds creativity as well. And I think there's there's a huge opportunity for students, career services, employers, everybody to, you know, really show how creative they can be during this time, and not just replicate stuff that has gone in the past and just do it in a virtual way. So I think, I don't know, from a skills demand perspective, I don't know if that will change. I think there's an opportunity for people to demonstrate those skills. I think it's highly likely that many employers, you know, might not go back to normal working arrangements. There may be some organisations that continue to work from home, and that in itself, you know, demands a different set of skills that I think students may need to demonstrate. But equally, I think that provides, you know, again, trying to be the positive again, no gloom, but you know, I think that provides a, you know, a really good opportunity as well. If more employers are more open and are more willing to accept, you know, working remotely or flexible working arrangements, then that opens up some industries or some parts of certain industries to a more diverse group of applicants potentially, which, you know, is not something we'll necessarily feel straight away as a benefit, but, you know, could really change how we think about our working environment. So I think I don't know if it will change the skill set, but I think that definitely the world of work may change a little bit, I would imagine, going forward.
Absolutely.
I mean, on that front, as you sort of mentioned there, Claire, that potential shift to remote working, although perhaps those kind of core transferable skills might not change, clear from what you've been saying that there'll be certain need for digital skills that maybe haven't been there before, but maybe could be heightened a little bit because of the current context. And I guess from your experience, sort of moving from, I suppose, a more sort of traditional employer to one that was very kind of digital savvy or very focused on digital skills, which kind of digital skills do you maybe feel could be most valuable for students moving into that new workplace, perhaps post-graduation or even while they're still at university?
I think this kind of I think the first digital skill that everybody needs to have is understanding your data and how it's used online, and how you, and equally how your presence is presented online. I think that's hugely important. I think that's the first key one every time. Secondly, I think it's really about, it's going back to that Slack thing almost to some extent. How do you network and communicate online? You know, what networks exist? How can you get the most out of them? How can you bring value to that, you know, that network or that community as well? And what value can you get out of it? I think so. Yeah. Secondly, networking online and communicating. But thirdly, I think it really depends, you know, on the kind of industry and the kind of role that you're going into. Technical digital skills, I suppose, are changing so quickly that it's worth spending time just exploring what's expected in your industry. I wish I'd probably spent a little bit of time exploring what they used in tech companies before I made the jump from higher ed to tech. So I think, you know, it might have been helpful for me before I'd started to go, you know, maybe do some dummy runs on Slack, that kind of thing. And I think, you know, there's so many amazing free, like, online resources out there now. You know, like the Open University's got their courses online there for free. Coursera, you know, lots of students will have access to, you know, lots of stuff through their universities as well. So spending this time researching what digital skills are kind of expected or the norm in the industry you're interested in, and then utilizing the, you know, the wealth of information that is available online to sort of explore and learn and, you know, innovate, kind of using those tools, I think is a really helpful thing to do during this time.
Thanks, Claire. I think that's a really good point, certainly about exploring your industry, which I think is something we would always sort of recommend for any job seekers anyway. But I think you make a good point that maybe the digital side isn't something we really consider, but now I guess will become a kind of key pillar of that. And so I think, you know, there's some really interesting sort of challenges and opportunities, as you said, that have come out of that. So we're kind of hopefully at least at 50-50 for the gloom ray of sunshine. So just as kind of maybe a final sort of summary of what we've talked about. Do you have any kind of advice for careers professionals or job seekers or any other interested parties in terms of either making the most of the current situation or kind of moving forward, how best maybe to adapt to the way that work may change?
Yeah, I think we kind of touched upon this a little bit at the beginning, actually, but I think for careers professionals and employers, this is a really good opportunity to explore how we can collaborate, you know, much like Google and Apple have to some extent, whether that's local universities coming together, whether that's employers across industries coming together. You know, I really strongly believe that if we collaborate in some of these areas on some of those shared objectives, then we can spend some time with certain work areas or certain individuals that are going to need more support during this time. I think this crisis is not going to affect everyone equally, and the more that we can do to collaborate to meet some of those shared objectives, the more time we have to focus on supporting the areas of work and the individuals that need it. So I think collaboration is definitely one, like a key one. Secondly, I think it's probably to take a bit of a step back as well. I mean, I know everything is super hectic at the moment, and it's hard to do that to some extent. But I think taking a step back and thinking a little bit more creatively about some of the things that we're perhaps putting online virtually, not just replicating, again, we kind of touched upon this, but not just replicating what's already been done in a physical space. How people interact with a physical event versus a virtual event is very different. Maybe taking some of those design thinking principles around sort of, framing the problem, you may come up with a really exciting solution actually to the problem that wasn't just replicating what had gone before. So I think taking a step back and applying some of those design thinking principles to some of the problems or challenges that we're facing is a really good thing for careers professionals and employers to do. And thirdly, I think it's probably lean into your vendors, reach out to the people like Handshake, whoever else you're kind of working with, and see what we can do together to help. I think we're all in this space together, and the more we, like I say, the more we can collaborate, the better. So leaning out and reaching out, I should say, to vendors is hugely important. Absolutely. From a job seeker perspective, it's slightly different, but some of the same. I think firstly it's about kind of taking the time to reflect and understand what's important to you as an individual. You might have had a plan that of what you were going to do over the next 6 months, and that may not be going the way you want it to at the moment. But I think it's fair to say that it's probably the same for both of you, but most plans that I've ever made have never gone quite exactly how I planned, especially in relation to career and life in general. So know that you're not on your own, and then try and stay positive. I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that point about collaboration is particularly important from all parts as well. I think you're absolutely right, from a university and employer partnerships, but as you say, also from a job seeker point of view, this is a great chance to, if your network perhaps isn't that broad at the moment, it's a great chance to kind of extend it and make it a bit broader.
Exactly. And reach out to your careers team. I think if anything at the moment, people are really willing to help each other. So people are pretty good anyway, but at the moment I think there's some really good opportunities for students to kind of reach out. And I think just remember that you can't control what's going on with the global economy or productivity, but you do have some control over your own productivity, and whatever little steps that you can take now, you might have other commitments as well, whatever little steps you can take, in collaboration with your careers advisors or mentors or your network will help in the end. And there are so many people that are willing to help you, and just don't forget that you're not on your own. And look after yourself as well, your mental health and your physical health, that's important.
I think, absolutely. I think it's, I think something that personally I think students and graduates can do now is keeping up to date with everything that's going on. I mean, it's changing day by day, and the economy is changing day by day all around the world. It's hugely affected. So just keeping up to date with not just your own sector that you're hoping to go into, but the whole economy. I mean, it's just a ripple effect, really. So I think that just keeping up to date constantly and thinking that nothing happens in isolation. If it's affecting one sector, it's going to be affecting another sector in maybe the same way, but maybe a different way. So I think that knowledge is absolutely key at this moment in time, I think. And something else, just on the collaboration point that you mentioned, Claire, I've not started reading it yet. I've got a book on order, but The University Challenge by Charles Clark and Ed Brine. I don't know if you've heard about it. It came out in January, but it's basically a book, and I'm not on commission here to sell it, but I've found out about it today, and I thought, this is brilliant. This is a really, really interesting book. And it's basically the challenge that universities are set to act as kind of like what the civic agenda is about, really, that they're there as kind of a pivotal point in society, to help us change the way that we collaborate with different sectors and what we actually do to help the society. And it was published in January. And both Charles and Ed, they couldn't have known that this pandemic was kind of on the cards, but it's come at a prime time, and it addresses collaboration and the importance of universities in addressing the whole challenge that we're facing now. So, yeah.
I'm definitely going to give that a read then.
Mine's coming tomorrow. So
at the moment.
A lot of good plugs this episode. We'll be picking that commission up. But I think some really positive messages to kind of finish on there, both from yourself, Clare, and Helen. And I think that's good, because that has officially lived up to our promise of never more than 50% gloom. So yeah, we've ticked it off for another week, which is great. But so we'll finish there for today. Clare, thank you very much for taking the time to be on the podcast with us today. And best of luck with all the developments at Handshake.
Thank you. We'll keep you updated.
If you've been interested in anything that we've talked about on today's podcast, do get in touch with us via the comment threads on the podcast link, wherever you're listening. We'll be tuning in again next week with a guest soon to be announced. And each week when we announce the guest, we'll be giving you a chance to put questions to the special guest in advance of the podcast. Thanks for tuning in and listening to us here on The New North.